Hello and welcome to the universe of God. We are really going to have so much fun going into what is called Sprites in the Spirit World. Now this is really, it's video 3, but it's starting our part 2 of the Angel of Light series that I started a few months back. And I really didn't have time to finish it out, and I couldn't quite close it out because there was really a lot more information, to share regarding what we're understanding about the natural and the supernatural, or the science and the spirit worlds, and how these two are really interconnected or married to one another, but they've been divorced and they've been separated over time as a scientific community has separated, studying what they can observe and what they can know from what is more considered mystical. Now we're going to talk about sprites in the spiritual world, and if science is, relating these spiritual and angelic terms, right? Are sprites related to spirit? And the reason why this is a good question is because not only when we look up the definition of sprites, do we get definition related to elves and fairies and so forth, but then we have a definition right beside it just when we search in Google, and it says spirit, and it plays off what sprites are. But my point is, here is an example of how sprites and spirit are already related to each other, or they seem to be related to each other. And based off of what we are discovering and uncovering in this wonderful universe of God, is that sprites and spirit seem to be synonymous terms. And I want to define sprite and kind of give a little introduction for this, for video 3 of this series, as we're diving into part 2 of Angels of Light, regarding, sprites and spirit, right? So here is an example of how sprite is defined. When you just Google what is sprite, it says an elf or a fairy. And then to the side of sprite, it says spirit or entity. And it says a spirit is a supernatural being, often, but not exclusively, a non-physical entity, such as a ghost, fairy, or angel. And so right here, we have an example of how something that's really, this is technology, has already related these terms when we just put it in a Google search engine. So what we are discovering about sprites in the scientific community really makes us look into the realm of the spirit, which is really the most natural process of scientific deduction in its purest form. I believe that we have something that's called a holy science, and it comes from God. It comes from the God who made the universe. This high, most high, omnipotent, omnipresent intelligence that really has proven and laid out a divine nature and a divine or supernatural order to everything from the highest heaven, from the depths of the cosmos down to the ground of the earth and beneath. And that's pretty fascinating. And I believe God, really deserves this credibility, and understanding what he has done and what he's created. And just in observing sprites, we're seeing what is being described in the scientific community in association with angelic and fantasy type phenomena. And they really examined these sprites, and they've developed terminology to describe them. And it relates us back to what we just seen that sprites were defined as. Now, when we search the scientific term for sprites, we get a different definition, but we're getting to that. But before we go any further, I want you to notice these pictures of the neural network architectural types. This picture of weather, lightning, atmosphere and light and water interacting together, and then this picture of matter and antimatter. And as you observe these pictures, consider these scriptures. Hebrews 11:3 says that by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. And then in Romans 1:20, we have like this reflectory scripture almost. It's reflecting here. And it says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, okay, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. And we don't want to leave that part out, because what it does is it takes us into the spiritual, where we become beings and people without excuse for knowing that there is a divine intelligence, there is a God, there's a creator. If anything, there's a creator of this supernatural and natural intelligence that takes what is invisible, metaphysical, quantum mechanics, atom particles, of existence, and manifests them into the visible realm. That's more than phenomenal. That's almost unexplainable. But God has not left us blind, deaf, and dumb without any information on the matter. And thanks to, the goodness of God, I would say, is that all things are working to the good, because we have our scientists in the modern age, in the era that we live in, that are taking this information, this scientific study of our world, both the visible and invisibles, right? And sharing that with us through the lens of science. And in the universe of God, it is, my job and many others to really help this information unfold to everyone, to those who want to know, and show you how these things are interconnected. And one does not really exist without the other. And that we're going to marry these terms of science and spirit back together where they belong. And we're going to observe what's being said here through, the lens of, you can say light and dark almost, to understand the lens of light, and how we observe this light. So, both in the supernatural and the natural, or the science and the spirit. These are synonymous terms again. So I want to share this concept of light angles or light angels, and something we need to be mindful of. When we're examining light through the lens of science, we can gauge a new or another understanding of how Ang-ELs are also angles of light. And we do not seek to limit angels to just angles of light, nor sprites, because that would be error. And the reason for this is because, again, these terms are married. They coexist. It's like duality, it's like left brain, right brain, male, female. These things exist and they coexist. And when they're married together, like the male and the female, they produce such much more beautiful, bountiful fruit, than when they're separate. So we don't want to keep separating this information. We want to bring it together where it belongs, because this is more evidence of the God of the universe and the universe of God. Now, when we are observing light and these phenomena that we're talking about in scientific terms like sprites and angles of light, and we're relating it to angels of light, we start to actually get insight, okay? The kingdom of heaven is within for a reason. But let's just bring that in more scientific terms here. So I'm going to go back to share this insight. When you observe light and other natural phenomena, you experience pretty much how we see, how we perceive and how we understand what it is that we are actually seeing. Thus, we gain insight for what we cannot see, this invisible. We gain insight for this invisible, what's inside, even, right? What's invisible or what's within. We gain insight, which creates a more supernatural, spiritual aspect, a more supernatural element, a more supernatural visual, and even angle. Okay, we gain insight from this more supernatural visual here. This angle being another or a new way to observe the world, the physical. And it's an opportunity for the projection, again, of a new or another image that's being revealed or reflected to us. And simply put, when we see the pyramid and how light is coming in and it's reflected to us, how we actually see it, how light manifests and unfolds during the day, when water hits it, all these things, they're simple and scientific and observable things for what is not seen. That's what's so awesome. And that's how we can take this scientific information and point it back to not only the Holy Scriptures, but the holy science that is here in God's universe, and that's what I love to discover and uncover and even share. I'm here to share and be a vessel and channel this information to you through the kingdom of God, because that's where it originates. And I wanted to do something simple and share this information, this scientific understanding, in just such simplistic terms. But one of the things I noticed was that the candle reflects in a flat screen TV, and it gives us this visual. It looks like a sun with, these arrows of light, of rainbow, arching out in different directions, in 4 different directions, mind you. And this is a repeatable, observable, scientific thing. And it's simple. You light a candle, it's in front of a flat screen, and you get this observable type of phenomena. Now, why is it a phenomena? Because it's some light that we cannot see that's now being seen in this reflective image. And now we have a new way of observing not only the candlelight, basically the candlelight. We're observing this candlelight in a new way. And this is really a simplistic way to understand some of the science behind what is visible coming from what was invisible. Okay, this wasn't there. We light a candle, it reflects off the TV screen. Now we have this new image or another picture reflecting to us, really. And what it's reflecting is light back to us. This is the physics in its simplest type of terms. So I wanted to share that because I really wanted to bring it down home. And again, it's kind of, an introduction to SPRITES, and how we, how the universe of God, how we are trying to process this, how I want to share this with you all. And so we can develop a holistic type of understanding of SPRITES, the SPRITES of the world of myth and the SPRITES of the world of science, or the world of science and spirit, basically. So SPRITES are associated with various upper atmospheric phenomena, including things like blue jets and elves. Now, what's really important as we ease, out of this part of SPRITES and go more into a lot of scientific information about it, what I wanted to share is how the scientific community is calling these elves, gnomes, pixies, and sprite halos. And they're using these type of words to describe sprite activity and phenomena in, our world and our atmosphere and what we can see when we see the atmosphere and the different elements, and earth and light interacting, and lightning is just a really simple example of that. So really quick, I want to bring the scriptures back into this because we're changing how we're seeing things. We're changing how we're seeing God's universe, and we're understanding the invisible, and how the visible is birthed out of this invisible. And that's pretty amazing. But 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. This is very interesting to ponder. In Colossians 1:16, it says, for by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things being created through him and for him. And this is something that we want to take in for a moment, because what was just described in the Bible was supernatural or angelic realms. And so we're going to come back in the next video part and video 4, and we're going to go more into what we understand as sprites. So I'll see you in part 4.